My name is Weintraub from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, and I'm focusing about the teaching and learning of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict in Israel. I'm conducting a multi-phase project about the most important and formative event in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, which is the 1948 war. For the Palestinian, it's the Nakba, the catastrophe, the destruction of the Palestinian society and homeland. For the Israeli side, it's the war of independence. It's the realization of 2,000 years of aspiration for a Jewish homeland in the biblical land of Israel. My research is multi-phase. The first phase was about curricula and textbooks representation of the 1948 war. And the second stage was about how students think ethically about the 1948 war. So it's not only what students know about the war, but whether they think it was justified or not. So the first round of data collection I conducted just before October 7, in August and September 2023. And we had about 400 participants, graduate of the secular and the religious system in Israel. And then the October 7 and the war in Gaza began. So we returned to the same participants about 4 months later. And we saw how they changed their mind following the outbreak of the war. So I can give maybe 3 main conclusions or insight from this research. The first, we saw how the importance of socio-educational background and also cultural aspect, how they affect how students think ethically about the 1948 war and whether they're justifying it or not. Secondly, we saw that gender is highly predictive for ethical judgments, which was very surprising because throughout the questionnaire we haven't seen the influence of gender, but in this very sensitive ethical question, we saw it. We saw that women have much more hesitation and say much more, I don't know how to answer this question. And lastly, we saw that after the war began, almost all students, that doesn't matter the gender or the educational background or the cultural background, had much lower ability to apply historical thinking concept. And we can probably explain this trend by saying that they had much more motivated reasoning. Even if they went to the unjustifying stance or the complex stance, still they were much more motivated by their emotions and so forth. One of the things we found which was very surprising in this work was the difference between the genders, between men and women. And women had much more hesitation. So actually we were very surprised because we haven't seen differences in historical consciousness among genders. So we went furthermore to research that, and then we gave them a more ethical question about the atomic bomb, about internal affairs within Israel. But still, in each one of these ethical questions, we saw how women had much more I don't know and had much more hesitation. So what we've done just a few months ago is adding a bit of knowledge questionnaires and also aspect of self-assessment, how much you think you answered right, and relative assessment. What do you think is your rank compared to all other participants and so forth. And we thought that in a very sensitive and controversial issues like the 1948 war, women had the same knowledge as men, but much, much lower self-assessment and relative assessment. And thus, they also said much more I don't know. Nevertheless, in like a more distant events like the atomic bomb, which is not relating to the Israeli situation, women actually had a bit lower knowledge, but the same self-assessment and relative assessment. So the reason they said I don't know, it's because really women are less interested probably in the atomic bomb dilemma, so they really less know about it. So we see different dynamic between the gender when we are talking about ethical judgment that are in a very conflictual situation, and ethical judgment that are distant and are more, I would say, not so conflictual. When you're talking about peace education, usually it's being done in a post-conflict situation. But in Israel, we are in the midst of this very violent and ongoing conflict. So definitely we see the importance of the historical consciousness and the willingness to be open to the other side in the dynamic of the conflict. But I think especially in conflict situations, the problem is not only the history education or the peace education, it's actually the educators generation, right? Sometimes we don't want to educate for peace or to change the history education. So it's very hard to come with complaints to the younger generation if the older generation is actually have more resentment towards these kinds of attitudes. So it's very, very hard to implement change in the curricula or textbooks or in teaching practices while you are in the midst of an ongoing violence and that affects everyone's life. So yeah, when you are conducting education, you need the whole society to be involved, and it's the condition and circumstance currently are not there. So yeah, this is the current thing we are pursuing, and hoping maybe to conduct some kind of international cooperation and about this and some comparative analysis about the gender differences and how different educational and cultural background affect the student historical ethical judgments.